Keith Smith joins us here. And, of course, you can follow Keith at Keith Smith NBA. He does a great job. Spotrac. He can give us some insight on the Celtics as well. That trade last week. We got a lot to talk with Keith, so let's bring him here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, Keith? How you been, pal?
Hey, I'm good. Yeah, a lot going on in the NBA, even in the middle of the playoffs. Everything else seems like it's happening too.
It sure does. And let's talk about what's going on here. Over at ESPN, Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting that the Sixers and Ben Simmons' team ongoing talks about his future. Now, he didn't request a trade, but when you hear something like this happening, do the signs point towards more likely that that's the road that this could go down?
Yeah, I think so. Generally, there's not a whole lot of reason to be meeting with the representatives for a player you've already have signed and isn't eligible for an extension or anything like that, unless, there's some level of unhappiness. So my guess is after a lot of comments were made following their, playoff loss, series loss that about, Ben Simmons by Doc Rivers, by some of his teammates and the like, that the Sixers, Ben Simmons agents and him want some answers as far as, hey, Sixers, what are we doing here? Are we, still together in on this, for the foreseeable future?
In your mind, is it better for these two sides just to say, look, it's not working here? Or do you think that it can work in Philadelphia for Ben Simmons?
Yeah, I'm starting to get this sense that, much like I think we talked about back in the day with Markelle Fultz, I don't know that it's ever going to happen for Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. And that's not a Philadelphia thing by any means. It's just sometimes guys go so far down one path that it's really difficult to picture it kind of turning around and getting back to a really good place. So I think that there is a chance, that it might be best for both sides to move along. Now, Philly shouldn't just be moving him to move him. It should be the idea of, all right, well, let's, make something happen here if it makes sense for us trade-wise to do something. And then, for Simmons, of course, it's not the worst thing in the world to move along and get a fresh start somewhere else.
Obviously, the next question would be value. I mean, pennies on the dollar. Can they get something of value? What level of player? I mean, what in your mind is out there for the Sixers to explore?
Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as, I saw people suggesting it's one of the worst contracts in the NBA and those kind of things. That's about 2 or 3 bridges way too far for me. But I do think, this is a guy where there are questions about, is the offense ever going to get there? Because if it's not, then you have to really change your perspective. And the reality is, no matter how good of a defensive player you are, if you're not a capable offensive player that can be on the floor during crunch time of playoff games, that's going to cap your value quite a bit. So I think ultimately what we're kind of looking at here is with the with Ben Simmons is he's got to get to a position where with another team or with Philadelphia where they can we can afford you not to shoot the ball. We can play you in a playmaking role and those kind of things. But I think his days as a point guard on offense are probably over. But a secondary playmaker from the power forward position or something like that, I think that's kind of his role going forward. But then that becomes well, what is that worth trade value? Well, it's not worth just giving them away, but it's also not going to return you a incredible package either.
Yeah, I know that the whole point guard thing has kind of been discussed and, maybe getting him off the ball. And some people will say, all right, well, what other spot can you play for a guy who doesn't shoot? And one of the things he excels in is when he does have the ball in his hand in the open court and all that kind of stuff. So what is the best kind of fit? What kind of roster, what kind of team around Ben Simmons works?
Yeah, I think what you need to do at this point is, as I've been kind of, saying, is you're not going to build your team around Ben Simmons, but if you're going to bring him in, you need to build your team with his skill set in mind. And what I mean by that is you're going to play him probably at the 4 offensively now. And what you're going to do is you're going to put him in positions where there's going to be a whole lot of shooters around him, and you're going to play him as an off-ball guy, somebody that's a screener, somebody who is getting the ball off of, a couple moves, and then he's going to, make plays from there. And I think that, becomes really important, because if you're putting him in a position to be your primary ball handler, your primary creator, I don't care who else is there. Your offense is always going to struggle and have a cap on it because he just won't shoot the ball. There's a quote going around from Scottie Pippen now. I believe it was in GQ, where Scottie Pippen said the difference between Ben Simmons and Giannis isn't afraid to be humiliated. He'll go out there and he'll shoot air balls and miss other things. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but he's not in the end of the world. Where Simmons, if he misses a free throw or thinks he's going to get fouled, he's just going to start passing the ball and passing things up. And there's a lot of truth to that. There is a lot of things in there. And I always say you can build an offense around a bad shooter. You can't build one around a non-shooter.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because so many similarities between Giannis and Ben. They're both big guys who can handle the ball, can take the ball to the basket. But you're right. Giannis isn't afraid to shoot, even if he's 0 for 10. He'll just keep doing it because he wants to give the other team that perception that he might. Now, they might sag all the way off of him. Then that's when he says, all right, I'll just crank it into fourth gear and I'll try to run right through you. When if I have to get to the line, I'll get to the line. Now, sometimes the limitations of his offense late in a game is a problem. But if Ben Simmons just essentially said, I will mirror my offensive game after Giannis, is that something that they could win with?
Yeah, it's you can. I think you can win. I mean, clearly, the Bucks have won. They've gotten there with an offense like that. It's just what you can't have on the floor is guys who it was so telling of the entire Ben Simmons experience. And I'm going to go right to the player, but he knows where he passed up in a dunk. Because, maybe he thought he was going to get fouled or something along those lines. That cannot happen. You need to at least make those plays where you can score. And I go back to, I retweeted this a couple days ago. There was a tweet going around, Eric Fawcett, who does a nice job covering basketball, primarily at college level, where he put together a clip of Simmons at LSU taking jump shots. And I remember, and I added my thoughts on this, looking at Ben Simmons and saying, wow, all right, he's probably never going to be a high volume or a great three-point shooter, but, 10 to 15 feet, no problem. Couple dribbles, pull up, that's definitely what he can do, mix in the occasional three, and off we go. And now we're in a position where he won't even do that now. And at that point, what value does that guy really necessarily have on the floor for you, especially late in games? Because then the defense is just going to say, hey, forget it, I'll turn my back to you entirely. I'm going to mess up your passing lanes and everything else. Because we always used to say, if he won't take jump shots, at least he'll drive really hard. And if you're playing off him, he gets ahead of steam and he can do his thing. But if he's not going to do that either, that's almost a completely useless offensive basketball player.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there's some video of him doing, shooting elbow jumpers in Summer League. When he first got drafted by the Sixers, he came right out and was shooting elbow jumpers. And by the way, had pretty good form, swish after swish. I mean, he's a guy that, look, is he going to be the best guy in the league? But Jason Kidd was a horrible three-point shooter when he got in the league and became one of the top, 15 all-time three-point shooters just because he kept working. That's the big question. Around basketball, do people think Ben Simmons wants to be great?
Yeah, and there is that question where people are looking at it and saying, okay, we know Shaq was not a good free throw shooter, but you got every year the stories about these are all the different things Shaq is trying to fix his free throw shooting. You would get that, with Giannis, it was, all right, is this guy ever going to shoot? And then the next thing you know was, all right, this guy is now, taking the occasional jump shots and the like. So I don't think there is any way he's ever going to become a big time volume 3-point shooter or a good 3-point shooter. But you got to at least, get to a point where going to the free throw line, you're not terrified of getting fouled that it's so much that it changes the rest of your game. If that's where you could get to, well, then you could definitely win with that. But I'm starting to doubt because we haven't seen it happen yet that's even where we'll get to either.
All right, Keith Smith covers the NBA. Let's get a couple of news and notes around the league here. Let's go to Boston. They've hired a coach, Ime Udoka, who was in Philadelphia, San Antonio, and he's now the head coach of the Boston Celtics. So give us a little insight on that hire.
Yeah, I think Boston did pretty good here with this, without having any assurity that a first-time head coach is going to be great. I think they really did well. So what the Celtics are getting here was they prioritized somebody who could really connect and build relationships with their players, as well as kind of be that bridge between the front office and the players, the other coaches and the players, and that's what they got in Udoka. He's famously known for his relationship building, being a connector, and those kind of things. He's well thought of as one of the best defensive coaches out there. There's a lot of people who have given him credit over the years. He already has at least some level of pre-existing relationships with several guys on the Celtics, some of them from their Team USA experience, and Al Horford from their year together in Philadelphia. So I think they did really, really well with this hire, and I think it was an important one for Brad Stevens to get somebody that they really wanted to get in there, because I think that makes a lot of sense for them going forward with what they want to do.
Give me what is the message with the Al Horford trade? Is this a monetary move, or is this a move to get them back to a competitive? Do they think they can compete in the East because of that? I know Sixer fans might be like, "Huh? Wait, what? Al Horford?" But what is the message from Boston with this?
Yeah, so the Celtics felt like they were going to be right back in contention, even if they didn't do anything. They very much, without completely blaming injuries, the feeling has been they were just as snake bit as anybody was this year, which dropped them in the standings, which gave them a very difficult first round matchup. They feel like almost any other first round matchup they could have been competitive, other than the Nets. So they feel like they were going to be right back in it. Now, when they go to the Al Horford move, it is primarily financially motivated. What this did was this freed up about $7 million for them in flexibility this year, which they were going to be dancing right around the luxury tax. They're thought to be 10 to 12 million over the tax is their absolute cap that they want to pay for a team right now. So now they've got some flexibility to re-sign Evan Fournier, do some different things. Then going forward, they have a really, increased flexibility. The genius of that contract that Philadelphia signed Horford to is that last year is only partially guaranteed. So if you get to a position where the Celtics, and there's a lot of confusion about this, yes, you probably initially saw if Philadelphia makes the finals or wins the finals, the guarantees increase and become fully guaranteed, but it transfers to his new team. So now with Boston, and you're happy to say, hey, we made the finals, we'll fully guarantee it and we'll move on there. But on the court, they came to a belief of Kemba Walker, was he going to be healthy enough to really impact winning, and was he going to be a guy that you could build a winner around in the playoffs? Whereas Horford, even not being the player he once was, still a pretty good stretch big, still defended pretty well over the last couple of years, and he's about the same rebounder he's always been. So they feel pretty good about, hey, we're in a good place with Horford on the court. But the main thing was about that flexibility on the cap sheet this year and very much the next year moving forward.
Let me ask you this: if you are in the playoffs still, you're not able to make a trade, right? I mean, how are these trades being done? Why it almost seems unfair that these teams are allowed to make these off-season moves while there are teams still playing.
Yeah, no, it's always been this way. We usually get a trade every other year or so at this point in the season. As soon as your season is over, you're in off-season mode.
Wow.
Now, there are restrictions. You can't trade a guy who's going to be a pending free agent. That ends at the trade deadline. You can't trade anything. It has to work in this current league year. The salary matching has to work because you're still working off of this year's salaries. So that's the difference there, and that's why that trade was done and made official and all those things. But what you can't do is you can't work on a sign and trade or trade a guy who's going to be a free agent or anything like that. But yeah, as soon as your season is over, trades are allowed. They're usually not this big, I guess is the best way to put it, with name guys like this. It's usually something smaller, but usually about every other year we get a trade while the playoffs are still going on.
All right, a couple more as we take a look at this NBA, the offseason. Rick Carlisle is back in Indiana as the head coach there. I mean, that's a team that seems like it's kind of, it's funny because Nate McMillan was there and he got let go because they didn't think that he was the guy. Now he's in Atlanta, and here's Carlisle. So now you got Rick Carlisle trying to elevate this Pacers team, which just kind of seems to be one of those teams stuck in the middle.
Yeah, and there's expected to be some roster changes coming in Indiana. One of the things that, talking to various folks around the league is a lot of people expect them to very heavily explore splitting up Miles Turner and DeMontis Sabonis. Likely Sabonis would be the one who stays. He's now been a two-time All-Star, and maybe Turner gets moved. I think they're realizing that pairing together, two starters, just isn't going to work in the NBA the way it comes together now. We know T.J. Warren has gone through various points where he wasn't overly happy. Sounds like a lot of that was, though, related to Nate Bjorkgren, but we'll see what happens. There's been a lot of talk that they explore trading Malcolm Brogdon, and then they've got, a couple other guys on the roster that look a little interesting. So I think Rick Carlisle comes in as a coach that you know and trust, is a pretty good coach, and you're going to, have some pretty good success with, because his Dallas teams are always pretty good. And then whatever roster change comes, but that was the first step in what might be a pretty big offseason of change for the Pacers.
All right, tonight you got Clippers and Suns. You're getting Chris Paul back. You got to feel good if you're Phoenix. I know you're going on the road here, but how do we see? I mean, do they? The Clippers, hold their home court and tie this thing back up? This is the second time they've been in this situation. Really, the third time, I think.
Yeah, every time we think we know what's going on with the Clippers, it's like, nope, we're going to flip the script on you. So I think at that point, you just kind of take what comes. But, yeah, they're in a tough spot. They're going to get a bump from being home. Everybody gets that bump from that first playoff game home. But without Kawhi Leonard for them and Chris Paul returning for the Suns, that makes it really, really difficult for them. They're going to have a hard time keeping up. And for the Suns, I think this is really important, because even if, they let's say, they lose this game but are able to close it out in 5 or whatever, you get Chris Paul back on the floor for a few games, and what that's able to do is get his rhythm back, get him back ready to go before you're in the NBA Finals. So I think the Suns are looking pretty good for them to advance. But in the end, we'll see. The Clippers, like I said, every time we think we have them figured out, they go the other way on us.
Yeah, it's been crazy. And then, of course, you got Atlanta. I don't know. I'm not surprised that they won that first game. I think this Atlanta team, they just have a nice they're put together really well. I mean, do they have like that secondary star player? Not really, but they know their roles, they fit their roles, and they have a superstar leading the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Trae Young, 100% a superstar. There's still people want to scream, he's overrated, he's not that good. I don't know how, we're still, having that conversation after the last series he had, and then the game 1 he had in this series. He, absolutely is a, superstar level player. But I think when you look at that Hawks team, I like what you said. They're well put together. Their starting 5 is pretty good. And they're missing DeAndre Hunter, who's one of their kind of key versatile defensive players. But then you have Danilo Gallinari coming off your bench. That's, really tough. Most teams struggle to match that. You've got Solomon Hill, who is kind of an afterthought player, but he's out there giving them good defensive minutes. Lou Williams is a solid veteran on their bench. And the biggest thing is their mix of veterans and then young players, they just are not afraid at all. They're going to come in. They're going to play their game. They don't really care who you are. Trae Young's out there throwing off the backboard alley-oops in, crunch time of a really close playoff game. That just tells me we're going to do everything we want to do out here. And right now, the world is kind of theirs.
He's been fun to watch. They, unfortunately, yes, they beat the Sixers, eliminated them, but they have been fun to watch. They do it the right way. I love the energy that Collins and Capella give. They get every offensive board. I think that was a huge difference in the Sixers series. They get those offensive boards. They get a lot of second chances.
Yeah, they just keep coming. You kind of think, all right, we did our job. Trae Young missed. Herder missed, Bogdanovich missed, Gallinari missed, but then Collins and Capella, if you don't get a body on them, they're going to get on that board, and you may get a body on one of them, and the other one is the one who sneaks in. I think John Collins, he had a couple struggles in the Knicks game, but I think over the Sixers series and now against the Bucks, this is a guy who, off a strong regular season, a strong year last year as a third-year player, he's playing himself into a ton of money. He said this past offseason, I think I'm a max player. That's where my head is at. And I think now you may see, a team come forward and say, you know what, we can do that because we think if we get the right guys around you, we're ready to go. So, yeah, I think he is, in a position where he's going to get himself, very, very handsomely paid this summer.
All right, we'll end with this. We know that the Simmons stuff is so high on the list here. Are there guys under contract that you have your eye on that could be traded this offseason?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of guys. What the sense is around the league right now is because we're in a position where there's not a ton of cap space out there, that the ways to make improvement might be via trade. So we talked about, right, Simmons, of course, is a guy. Kristaps Porzingis, the Mavs are gonna explore that market. I think you might see the Memphis Grizzlies with a handful of their role players. So Kyle Anderson, their backup guards, I think they're going to be involved. Portland is a team everybody's got their eyes on. Is this the offseason they finally split up Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum? Yusuf Nurkic has been a little weird with some of his comments out there. The Denver Nuggets, can they afford to keep that team together long-term, knowing Michael Porter Jr. is about to get paid? I already talked about the Pacers, the Chicago Bulls. There's a sense of, Thad Young, Tomas Satoransky. Would they go that direction? Could they even move, some of their other guys that are interested there? Is some team going to make them a massive offer for Zach LaVine? So I think there's a lot of trade opportunities coming, and I think if you're the very best teams in the league, the best way to move forward might be via trade. One thing I'm also going to throw it out at you is a lot of people are looking at, and I've been talking about this extensively, I think the Golden State Warriors may really, if they decide, we can do this thing and spend a ton of money one more year, they have two very good first-round picks. They have, 6 and 14, I believe, or 7 and 14 in the first round. They have James Wiseman's salary. They can sign and trade Kelly Oubre Jr. They have an opportunity to put some salaries together and go get a superstar player if that player becomes available and make one more run at this, because they've already shown that there's no barrier to how much money they'll spend. And this is their last year under contract with Stephen Curry right now to make another major run at winning a title. So I think there's a chance they may go really, really big this summer.
That should be a very interesting team. You mentioned Golden State to keep an eye on. They got 2 picks in the top 15 of the draft as well. So you got all that. Keith Smith, at Keith Smith NBA. Follow him for all the NBA offseason stuff. Spotrac.com. And, of course, he right here on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.